Laurie Marriott is the coordinator with Humanist Climate Action, a volunteer-led network of Humanist UK members and supporters committed to redefining lifestyles and campaigning for policies that promote low-carbon, ethical and sustainable living in the light of the degeneration of the Earth's climate and biodiversity. Laurie Marriott, thank you very much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Hi James, thanks very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Always keen, obviously, to be speaking about kind of environmental stuff and humanist stuff as well.
Perfect. Well, with that in mind, can you share with us your personal journey to humanism and joining Humanist UK and how that led into the particular focus on climate action?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's kind of a tale of two kind of streams of my interests coming together. So back when I was at university, which is probably about 2007, 2008, I saw an event advertised, and it was actually Andrew Copson was coming to speak and kind of tell people about humanism, what it was. He's obviously chief exec of Humanist UK now. That was quite a while ago, so it just shows how long he's kind of been involved in humanism. Yeah, I heard him speak. I was really inspired. It felt like coming home, if I can kind of, use that phrase. And it just, really made me realize this is for me. I'm a humanist. These are all my values. This is kind of exactly what I believe. All the people that I speak to who are humanists, we don't always necessarily 100% agree, but, I feel like we have the connection and kind of understand each other. So at the same time, at university, I was also becoming interested and active in environmental campaigning, as quite a lot of people do. So there were those kind of two streams that running alongside each other. And they started to come together when I actually, after I'd left uni, kind of got a job, had a little bit of disposable income. So I actually joined what was then the British Humanist Association at a Green Party conference. So it was those two things kind of starting to come together. Meanwhile, I think the British Humanist Association decided to join the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. And then out of that decision grew a group called Humanists for a Better World, who were kind of had a bit of a broader remit, as the name might suggest, but were obviously kind of, getting involved in that side of things, in climate campaigning and so on. And then out of that evolved Humanist Climate Action, which was actually launched during the pandemic. So when I saw that Humanist UK was kind of, putting together this group and focusing more on climate action, I knew that I definitely wanted to be involved in that. So they kind of put the call out for members and a coordinator. And I applied for that role. I think that was during the pandemic, so it must have been about 3 years ago or something like that. Humanist Climate Action. There's about kind of 9 or 10 of us, so we're all volunteers, which, a lot of people have day jobs, so we do kind of try our best, giving our time and so on. It just makes sense to me to kind of bring my humanism and my interest and passion for the climate and those two things together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder on that volunteer point, are you also looking for more volunteers?
I think we're always looking for help, certainly. There are a kind of set number of people that are allowed to be on the committee. We have actually just hired someone to focus on social media, which was we definitely needed a bit of help on. I'm not particularly kind of social media savvy myself in any way, so we definitely needed a bit on that, and we're hoping to kind of reach more people by posting more and kind of being more visible on social media in that way. We've also just hired someone to kind of focus on Northern Ireland and someone to focus on Wales as well. So again, we can kind of maybe reach and focus on those kind of regions a bit more. We're always looking for supporters, and I'm sure I can tell you later how people can get involved a bit more.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll definitely include all the links in the show notes for sure. And thank you very much for your story and background to this point, and how it seemed like a natural fit. In your opinion, do you think that climate action now should be a central feature for anyone who holds humanist values?
Yeah, I really, really do. Absolutely, kind of 100%. It comes from what I've just said, really, that it's just natural in my mind for those two things kind of to go together. So let me tell you kind of, I think, the two key reasons why. One is that for me, a massive part or a key tenet of humanism is empathy. So whether that's empathy for kind of those around us in our immediate social circles, whether it's, going wider to the societies we live in, but also like to other countries, all around the world, to kind of all humans. But you can also extend that even further to animals, to all life that kind of exists on the planet, and then also forward in time, so to future generations, both of humans and other animals that live on this planet. So if we think about kind of that empathy, and then we think about how how humans specifically are using the planetary resource we have at the rate we are, how we're kind of destroying biodiversity around the world, and generally just behaving, like our actions aren't really affecting our environment. Those two things aren't compatible, that empathy and kind of those actions and behavior. And empathy, for me, it's quite a strong foundation for ethical behavior. So I think when you are holding those values, if you want to act those out in your life and the way you live, but also in how society is organized, to make those two things compatible, I do feel that kind of respecting the planet all needs to be kind of part of the same thing. Secondly, this might almost come across a bit spiritual in a way, but I feel a very deep connection to the natural world. I have, since I was a child. And also an absolute kind of fascination with the way that science can explain, the complex web of life around us. Obviously we all know about kind of Darwin and all that kind of thing. And for me, that appreciation and awe is actually enhanced by the knowledge that, all these things, all these connections were formed over eons by evolution rather than by a creator. So that's actually, a wondrous thing to me. So I see human beings as part of this complex system, but then I also see that we're not respecting the balance of that system. So we're behaving as if we're outside it, even though we are a part of it. So we are treating the earth as if, we've got many of them, or as if it's not kind of the only one. And without the belief that actually, someone or something's going to drop in and save us, which I don't obviously believe there are, and that it's just this one life I have, just this one life we have, just this one planet, that really convinces me that we actually need to take responsibility for our actions and our activities as a species as a whole. But I mean, what do you think, James? Would you kind of agree with that? Have you got, how do you see it kind of sitting with your humanist values?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me completely. I think what I would add is to draw on the very last point you made there about responsibility. I think, as you mentioned, rather than accepting that we are of the natural world, or even of the universe, if you want to go even further back in time, and we're made of these natural causes and elements, is not to shirk our responsibility. I think the fact that we have developed to be aware of where we came from and aware of our surroundings, but also develop the awareness of our impact on our environment, means that we have a huge responsibility, not just to the planet as it is, but I think to future generations as well. I think we've been given this incredible opportunity, or have developed this incredible opportunity, I guess, as a species that is so aware and can achieve such amazing things. One of my driving factors is that we're able to flourish as much as possible in the future and maximize human potential. And core to that is preserving the only environment we know that can sustain us.
Yeah.
So I do feel as though in a way we have a special place because we have that awareness and those capabilities to have a change, to have an impact on the environment. So yes, it definitely speaks to me, and I'm sure almost all of our members and listeners would be supportive of the cause. But I guess it comes down to action. Yeah. And so I'm interested. A couple of questions really. I'd love to come on to the actions that you're taking now and what you've got planned in the future. But I'm also curious to know, do you ever encounter objections, or what are the common is it objections or counterpoints from fellow humanists who say this is not our priority, or this is not in line with humanist values at the moment? Has that been conversations that you've had?
Yeah, so there's a couple of angles there. One is obviously Humanist UK kind of has several campaigning priorities, which we all support, things like legalising humanist marriage, legalising assisted dying. On the face of it, those are obviously kind of a bit divorced maybe from environmental concerns. They're not necessarily kind of intertwined. They are kind of more about social, ethical issues. So Humanist UK, has its own priorities as well, and I think sometimes those are maybe in conflict with other religious groups that might have different opinions, whereas some of the environmental things maybe are like more of an opportunity for interfaith cooperation as well. So I think sometimes people that are humanists maybe just have slightly different priorities, and it's not necessarily that they wouldn't support us or make ethical or kind of greener choices in their everyday lives or anything like that. It's just maybe that they think Humanist UK has specific priorities that they should be focusing on, which absolutely fair enough. But I think we need to try and bring everybody with us in general, so everything that we can do to kind of convince people to support in any way, it is always going to be a positive thing as well. Also, the other thing I was going to say, I just remembered, the other angle is that we get the question quite often, do we support groups like Extinction Rebellion? Do we support, kind of the Just Stop Oil type approach of, blocking roads or throwing paint on the, paintings in art galleries and things like that? Obviously, as a branch of a charity, we would, we have to be very firm. We'd never encourage anyone to break the law in any way. At the same time, we recognise that there are different ways to be an environmental activist. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about recently, is that almost anything can be an act of activism, if that makes sense. So even if you're painting a painting and putting it up in your window, and that's inspiring someone that's walking past to think or something, that's still an act of activism. So really small things can actually kind of be that way. I think there's probably quite an overlap in terms of membership of supporters of Humanist Climate Action and groups like Extinction Rebellion. And we did join one of their protests it must have been last year because it was last March, because they'd actually changed their stance slightly. So it was a very family-friendly protest, and it was a very kind of non-violent, just direct action kind of march, completely legal, with just lots of different groups coming together. So there were lots of different faith groups there, and all different environmental NGOs, organisations, community organisations. It was almost just like a big party, to be honest. We were there on the biodiversity day. Everyone was, well, not everyone, but lots of people were dressed up in animal costumes and masks and things like that. So it was almost just kind of a very, festive atmosphere. So I think, it is an ongoing discussion in society about how we protest, how we're allowed to protest, and the impact that different kinds of protest and activism can have. So I think that's a really interesting question. It is one that comes up. But again, just to repeat, we would obviously never encourage anyone to break the law while doing anything to do with kind of humanist climate action.
Absolutely, yeah. And I really think this can't be a polarized political topic anymore that people want to make it, right? And yes, we can be aligned on the overall message and outcomes of the campaigns, but we don't have to support everybody's methods. And I think that's the thing. You don't have to support someone 100%. Say, we can agree on and campaign in the same direction. Definitely, yeah. And it's great to hear that this is also in many occasions an interfaith campaign as well. And again, this is something that we can all come together and align on. So talk us through some of the activities that you're involved in, and also in your experience, what have been the most impactful way that you at Humanist Climate Action or individuals or community groups like ours can align and have a real world impact?
Sure. So some of the work that Humanist Climate Action does is kind of government facing, I guess you'd say. So when the government's releasing consultations or select committee inquiries on anything that we feel we can contribute to, we're kind of making responses to those, making sure that the humanist voice is heard. So for example, the government are, I have to say, quite slowly banning plastic packaging. So they're almost consulting item by item. So for example, there was a consultation on plastic cutlery. I think there was another one on kind of takeaway boxes. So it's a bit of a drawn out process. But there's there's different things to take into account there, like how quickly those should happen, what should the alternative be. Obviously, you need to make sure the alternative is actually still a more sustainable version than the plastic kind of one was. So it's different things like that that we've contributed to. Some kind of larger ones as well to do with biodiversity targets and things like that. So those are just kind of obviously ad hoc. When they come up, we try to respond and make sure that the humanist voice is kind of being heard and supporting kind of the best possible actions in those areas. We're also obviously trying to encourage humanists themselves to live as sustainable lives as possible. I mean, I just want to, preface this bit by saying we have been living in a cost of living crisis, and sometimes making sustainable choices in what you buy or what you do, it can be more expensive. So I think we always need to keep that in mind when we're talking about this, because what people are able to do with their individual lifestyles is very variable. So we always kind of need to make sure we're kind of saying that, rather than just expecting everyone, to instantly buy an electric car or something like that. But I think there are lots of small shifts that people can make. It's the obvious stuff. I'm sure you and the listeners have heard it all before. It's eating less meat. It's trying to buy kind of locally sourced food and goods, using public transport, swapping to cycling or walking for the short journeys where you can, cutting down on flying where you can. But one thing I did want to talk about, which is actually one of the most impactful things that you can do, it's not too difficult, and it potentially won't actually cost you anything, and that is looking at where your money is. So who do you bank with? What's their investment policy? Where is your money? Where are your savings? What are they being invested in? And importantly, where is your pension? So hopefully you have one. Where is it? So there's some research to show that actually switching to a greener pension can have the same impact on your personal carbon footprint as stopping flying. And wow. You can change your pension almost at the click of a button. There are quite a few options nowadays. So there's everything from pensions that just kind of state that they don't invest in fossil fuels. And then there's ones that are kind of actively supporting green investment and innovation and kind of green businesses around the world as well. So it does require a little bit of research, and obviously just a little disclaimer, it's important for everyone to do their own research and to make financial choices that are right for them. But it is something that can have quite an impact, because as well, kind of once you've made that decision, it's kind of just ticking away in the background. So it's not something, it's almost a one-off. You don't need to actively, do it or think about it. How many people kind of think about their pension on a day-to-day basis? It's just kind of something that you can do, and then that your money, is actually being invested in things that aren't detrimental to the planet. So, it's quite an interesting one that isn't talked about so much as well.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah, and I guess that's a good way of almost consumer activism as well. If you are choosing where you spend your money, and it is definitely the case that there's a lot of greenwashing out there. So thorough research is required in terms of how green a green definitely. Fund actually is. But that's how a lot of individuals can have an impact.
Exactly, yeah, and have an impact on the larger corporate world as well, I think, because the more people that are making that choice, eventually the more kind of companies and businesses that will catch on and be like, oh, actually, we need to have this as an option. So then the more options there will be for consumers as well.
Yeah, because my thought as you were talking was, what's the balance between top-down versus bottom-up change? I think a lot of pressure is sometimes put on us as individuals to change our lifestyles, which, as you say, during the cost of living crisis is becoming more and more difficult, challenging, rather than, actually this just being driven by either the regulators, the governments, or the big corporations themselves. But I guess this is another way to put pressure on corporations to change their practices.
Yeah, money does speak.
Yeah,
what it is. Yep.
And I have you read Hannah Ritchie's book, Not the End of the World, as well? That was
no. I'll write that one down.
Yeah, that's a good one I can recommend to listeners. Sorry, that's a good one I can recommend to listeners as well, for with lots of small tips and a lot of focus on a point you mentioned about particularly red meats, whether if you do eat meat, where is it sourced from, And effectively cutting down on beef and lamb can have a huge environmental impact. So all of these things, it's just useful to know. And again, there's a lot of contradictory information that I think is out there as well, which I guess another point I wanted to cover with you. I mean, we're living in an age of, where there's so much contradictory facts, alternative facts, disinformation, misinformation, which is being circulated online. Unfortunately, something as scientifically proven as climate change is getting caught up in this storm of, differences of opinion. How do you combat, both personally or through Humanist Climate Action, how do you combat misinformation and, I guess, climate deniers?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, I almost would have said almost past the point of climate deniers, at least in this country. But I'm not sure if that's kind of been a bit of a resurgence recently. I think it is really tough because much of kind of misinformation and disinformation takes place on social media, which it's just, it's too large of an arena to police or to, for anyone really to interact with it in that way, to, start Twitter arguments or however you would, X arguments, however you want to say, about a piece of misinformation or a claim. And then you've got, the addition of AI writing articles. You can, kind of just ask an AI bot to kind of write an article with a headline that's going to be a bit of clickbait or something to kind of suck people in so they're clicking on things. So, it's a bit of a wild west out there, I'm not going to lie. With Humanist Climate Action, what we do is just basically make sure that we are sticking to the science ourselves. So we regularly kind of review our terms of reference to make sure anything that we're promoting, all our kind of objectives are completely aligned with the scientific consensus. And then just in general, and I think this holds true for anything you're reading or any issue that you feel yourself forming an opinion about, you might say, is just to always encourage people to look beyond the headline, to look beyond the claim, to go back to the source of the information, whether that's a scientific study, whether that's, a journalist that's picked up something from a political speech, whatever it might be. Just always kind of go back to the source of the information and think about, why is this person saying this? What's the validity of the claim? And, just try and be as rational as possible and assess the information before you actually form an opinion about it. And I know that's quite difficult, and it's quite a lot to ask for everyone, to do that for everything that you see on the internet or, while you're scrolling through social media. So I think just really encouraging people to be skeptical, although maybe not to the point of kind of conspiracy. That's obviously the kind of the other end of extreme skepticism, is then like, oh, none of this is true. So it can kind of go too far, but it is a really difficult arena. And I think it's something that actually, as a society as a whole, we do need to be thinking about more and dealing with more. So, for example, the online safety bill went through Parliament last year, and that's really the first major piece of regulation that there's been. And it's the year, that was the year 2023, and social media has been around for much longer than that. So we really are kind of behind the times, and also by the time you regulate, it's already changed. So it's a very difficult area, and I just think we really need to be encouraging people to be skeptical, to be rational, to look at the evidence, and making sure that way of thinking is embedded in education as well, so that children are really just taught to focus on those kind of those ways of thinking and those ways of looking at information.
I mean, it's a constant struggle for all of us, as you mentioned. You really can't dig into every single headline that you read and fully go through that process. So yeah, it's I guess we also need to encourage better journalism in that respect as well, and a more of a science-based approach throughout society. And I think that is being encouraged as well for the next generation. So looking ahead towards the future, what is Humanist Climate Action's main goals and upcoming projects for the year?
So one of the main things we are working on at the moment, which is a really great opportunity for anyone that wants to get involved, is called the Great Big Green Week. So that's something that happens every year. And this year it just so happens, last year as well, it happens to coincide with the Humanist UK convention. So that's quite handy for us, again, to kind of align those two things. So this year's theme for the Great Big Green Week is Let's Swap Together for Good. So the good thing about that theme is it can kind of be interpreted in lots of different ways. So you can take it quite literally. So, instead of buying something new, you could be swapping something with your neighbour or someone in your community or family member. But you can take it more generally, and this is what we'll be doing at convention. And in general, we'll be encouraging humanists to make a pledge to swap something in your life for a more environmentally friendly alternative. So yeah, there's loads of different ways that you could do this. It could be a bit more esoteric, kind of swapping knowledge or skills with someone. You could be, going back to the things we spoke about before, you could swap out a meal a week where you usually eat meat for a veggie alternative. You could organise a clothes swap with your friends. You could swap out one of your usual activities for something else, like a litter pick or a nature hike or something like that. So the Great Big Green Week website has loads of resources and ideas. It's taking place in June. So I'd really encourage people to go and look at their website as well if you wanted to kind of set something up in your local community, and you can kind of register your event on there and see what other people are up to. Lots of schools get involved, lots of other kind of community groups. So that should be good. At convention itself, we're going to have the Humanist Convention, that is, we're going to have a stall there and encourage people to come along to be making their pledges, kind of maybe get their picture taken with their pledge. Things like that. So that should be good. That's kind of our main focus coming up. And then a bit later this year, another thing that we're hoping to do, and hopefully this podcast is the start of this as well, is to engage more with local humanist groups. Mm-hmm. So we think there are lots of opportunities for local groups to be getting involved, both with us, but also with kind of your local areas, local projects, local environmental campaigning. So the thing that we're going to be doing over the coming months is looking at how Humanist Climate Action can actually kind of support local groups in doing that.
That's great, and I think that leads on nicely to wrap up. If our listeners are part of a local group, or they as individuals would like to get involved, what can they do, and what's the best way to contact you?
Sure, yes. So one main thing to do is to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do via the Humanist UK website, and then you just kind of need to find the Humanist Climate Action section on the website. If you sign up for our newsletter, it's once every 2 months. We have all kinds of exciting things in it. So we've got interviews with humanists, some of which are patrons of Humanist UK. We've got actions that you can take, kind of updates on campaigns. Sometimes we might have kind of a book review. They try to encourage engagement as well. So people that kind of respond to any of the articles, we put responses in and get a bit of kind of conversation going. You could also follow us on social media, so Instagram and X/Twitter, and just watch out for any kind of forthcoming campaigns and actions that we have coming up as well. As I mentioned, we're hoping to work with local groups more, so you might actually just get kind of an email from us popping into your local group inbox later in the year anyway. There's also an email address, so that's climateaction@humanist.uk. And finally, if you are coming to the Humanist UK convention in Cardiff, please do just drop by the stall, because we're very keen to chat to people, really.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing you there and hope to hear more from Humanist Climate Action at many of our local groups very soon. So, Laurie, thank you very much for your time. Before we go, our standard closing question: what's something you've changed your mind on recently?
So I've got two things. One is more serious and related to this podcast, one less so. I did recently change my pension, as I discussed during the podcast. So I did my research, made the decision, and I did switch my pension over to a kind of a greener one, which invests in the things that I approve of rather than disapprove of. So that's one thing. And the other one was, I don't know if you remember Avril Lavigne, the singer. I've been listening to a podcast because there's a conspiracy theory about whether she was replaced, that she died and was replaced at some point. And I've kept changing my mind about whether I agree. But I think I've come down on the side of, I think Avril Lavigne is Avril Lavigne, and that the evidence is on the side that she has not been replaced. But I haven't finished the podcast yet, so I might change my mind again. You never know.
I thought that was going to be our first ever admission of someone believing in a conspiracy theory on the Humanism Now podcast. We'll have to wait until the end of the series to find out. But Laurie Marriott,
exactly.
thank you for everything you're doing at Humanist Climate Action. Such an important cause. Very much looking forward to hearing more from you throughout the year. And thank you for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thanks so much, James.